From Beijing is Victor Gao. He's the director of the China National Association of International Studies. Also with us in our Washington, D.C. studio is Scott Morris. He's a senior associate at the Center for Global Development. Thanks to both of you for joining us. Victor, let me start with you. Why do we need another infrastructure development bank? We already have the World Bank.
Yes, indeed, we have the World Bank, and in Asia we have the Asian Development Bank. But if you look at the focus of the World Bank and also ADB, their focus is actually traditionally on poverty alleviation, which is a very important and noble goal, and China has supported that and has actively participated in achieving that goal. On the other hand, if you look at Asia as a whole and several regions in Asia in particular, lack of infrastructure and connectivity is indeed a bottleneck preventing greater, faster, better development of the economy. Therefore, I think while the World Bank and the Asian Development Bank keep their focus on poverty alleviation, which will be supported by China and many other countries, the creation of Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, which is very much focused on helping improving connectivity, building up infrastructure, will be a new wave of development, because this will enable many countries in Asian development region to go beyond the barriers of lack of infrastructure and connectivity and bring down trade barriers in this part of the region because of lack of connectivity. And I would say this will really help emancipating a lot of productivity in this part of the world.
Scott, those sound like great goals, a good reason for the development or creation of another development bank. But the U.S. Treasury Department has criticized the AIIB as a deliberate effort to undercut the World Bank and the Asian Development Bank. Why is the U.S. opposed to the creation of this bank?
Well, what the U.S. says is that they're concerned about the standards that this new institution will use in its approach to infrastructure investment. And by standards, they're referring to things like how they will assess the environmental impact of these investments, how they will assess the social impact. The U.S. has been very active over many years in the World Bank and the Asian Development Bank in seeking a certain set of practices that ensure a high level of quality in the investments and a high level of protections in these areas. So their expressed concern is that this new institution may not seek those same that same high quality of standard that they have established for the existing institutions.
Victor, do you believe those to be valid concerns?
Well, first of all, the taste of the pudding is in eating it. Without eating the pudding, you actually really cannot tell whether the pudding is good or not in taste. Therefore, if the United States is really concerned about corporate governance, standards, etc., for AIIB, joining the bank by the United States is a very good and effective way of making sure that the standards are there and the goals are achieved. On the other hand, I would say the United States as a country has perfectly its own right to decide to join or not to join. But at the same time, the United States should also respect other countries to exercise their right to decide whether they want to join or not to join. For the United States not to join the AIIB, it's its own decision. And I would say, and I will urge the United States to join rather than not to join. But to urge other countries not to join is a little bit of an overreach. And I hope the United States will refrain from doing that. And by cooperating with AIIB by the United States, and I'm pretty sure the door is open for the United States to come in as a member, it will make it a better bank rather than a worse bank. And I would say that the goal of better governance, better standards, etc., will be the guiding principle for AIIB. And the fact that Britain, Germany, Italy, and France, and a whole bunch of many others, altogether 32 countries by now joining, will make sure that the bank is up to international standards. And also, if you look at the World Bank or ADB, is there anyone in the whole world who can say that they have a perfect record? No, I think the goal is to make sure that all the financial institutions existing as well as newly established will reach higher and higher in terms of standards and governance, rather than preventing the birth of another new financial institution simply because you believe it is not up to standard. The taste of the pudding is in eating it.
Right, Scott, isn't that a good reason for the US to join? If it wants to see good standards being maintained, social standards, environmental standards, if it wants to maintain good governance in countries that borrow money, it should be part of this organization to ensure that happens.
I think there is a case there. I think something slightly less than that is simply that the U.S. probably should not be trying to keep other countries from joining for the same reason, is that if you look at countries like the UK, France, Germany, generally they are aligned with the U.S. thinking around these issues. So it strikes me that it actually is in the U.S. interest to have these countries within the new institution rather than on the outside. When it comes to a question of the U.S. joining, frankly, I think there are sort of some major hurdles for that to happen, particularly with the U.S. Congress, and I just don't think it's very likely.
The U.S. efforts to stop other countries or dissuade other countries, its allies, from joining this bank was described by the influential Financial Times columnist Gideon Rahman. He said Washington's handling of the establishment of the AIIB was a diplomatic debacle. Was that a fair comment?
I think it's fair to say it's hard to find anyone who has viewed this positively in terms of what the public response of the U.S. has been in the past week, 10 days. I will say I think this aspect of the issue will pass soon enough. Longer term for the U.S., I think they have to think much harder about how they want the World Bank and the Asian Development Bank to operate going forward relative to a new institution that has a potential for a great deal of growth. And here, I think the U.S. has to be very focused on having greater ambition for these institutions and putting more money into these institutions. If they really are concerned about the growth of a new institution, they have to focus on making the existing ones more attractive.
Victor, how exactly will the AIIB work? How will it be different in its operations from the World Bank? And for instance, how will it deal with issues like debt defaults by some countries that borrow money?
No, I would say, first of all, the focus is different. As I mentioned, the World Bank is very much focused on poverty alleviation. And AIIB or AIIB is very much focused on infrastructure. Now, let me give you one example. Between the Chinese border with Myanmar, Laos, and Vietnam, all the way down to Singapore, there is no meaningful direct kind of a vertical transportation lines, either high-speed railways or high-quality roads, etc. And therefore, if you go to these places, Myanmar, Laos, Vietnam, Cambodia, and Malaysia and Thailand, there is a lot of potential in terms of productivity and creating benefits for the people in that part of the world. However, these potentials cannot be emancipated because there is simply a huge lack of infrastructure. Now, for each of these countries to build up its own infrastructure is time-consuming and also very, very capital intensive. Therefore, I would say these countries will benefit tremendously once there is a new financial institution whose mission is helping these countries to build up infrastructure and connectivity. Countries like India, which actually cannot emancipate all its wonderful potentials because of lack of infrastructure, will benefit tremendously if they cooperate with AIIB, and India has already become, signed up for becoming an official member, founding member. And I would say India will benefit tremendously from borrowings from AIIB. And I would say if the United States join, companies like Caterpillar, companies like GE, etc., will benefit hugely. And that will actually help create more jobs in the United States. Therefore, I think we should avoid looking at AIIB through an ideological or Cold War mentality. And also, while we talk about what's the position of the United Kingdom, Germany, Italy, France, and the United States or China or Japan, we forget the main focus. That is, the countries need the money for infrastructure. The major projects in these countries need money for major infrastructure. I would say if you are fair and objective and care for all these concerns, the more money, the better. The more money, the merrier. Of course, they need to satisfy a certain level of governance, of course. And I would say the United States will help itself by encouraging more such financing towards these major infrastructure projects rather than depriving these countries of a very strong source of additional funding for these infrastructures.
Scott, I mean, we can look at how this bank works. We can look at the merits of creating this bank or not. But at the end of the day, is U.S. opposition perhaps rooted in the fact that the creation of this bank actually challenges U.S. supremacy around the world, its global economic power?
Yes, I think there is a very real issue of strategic influence here. It's a reality that the U.S. Is the largest shareholder in the World Bank and the Asian Development Bank. Japan, for that matter, is also the second largest in the World Bank, and at the Asian Development Bank is the largest shareholder. So these institutions matter for them as a matter of strategic influence. A new institution where they are not in that position does present a little bit of a challenge. I have to challenge slightly something Victor said. While the World Bank he's correct, this is about poverty alleviation, the World Bank's mission. The fact is the instrument for them is largely infrastructure. So the new institution and the old ones are operating a great deal in the same space. So it does, these questions of how they handle debt issues and the standards they use do matter.
So are you saying they're going to act as competitors against each other rather than complement each other?
They could very well act as collaborators. I can see that there could be opportunities for them to work together on projects. But the question of competition and conflict comes around issues of how are they going to approach issues of debt sustainability. If a country faces a problem in terms of debt, will the new institution act in cooperation with the existing ones and sign on to existing norms and standards in the treatment of these issues? And these are very real concerns.
Victor, is this about politics, power, and influence? Very quickly, please.
No, I don't think so. I don't think there is a zero-sum game. If, for example, the World Bank and Asian Development Bank put all their money, all the financing they can line up in infrastructure projects in Asia, it's still a drop in the bucket. It cannot solve in a significant manner all these infrastructure needs in this part of the world. Therefore, I would say the demand is so big that the World Bank and Asian Development Bank and now the newly created AIIB Bank can really engage with each other, work as partners in helping satisfying all these financing needs in infrastructure sector in Asia.
Victor Gao in Beijing, Scott Morris with us here in Washington. Thanks to both of you for joining us.